1995.
Oh,
And I think Ed Leeper.
I'm too old for that.
Ed Leeper took the picture, I'm pretty sure. Getting arrested with Daniel Ellsberg and Vandenberg.
Yeah, we have a few minutes. So in 2010, I had just retired a few years earlier, and I was looking for something to do. So I joined a group at Vandenberg. McGregor was involved in it, of course. And we took the green tortoise down, the slow bus, and we got there at like, I don't know, 11, late at night. And we crossed the line after, there were some speeches, there were some guys from the Marshall Islands who were actually there, and Dan Ellsberg was there, and Louis Vitale, Cindy Sheehan, and about 10 other people. And so we, after the speeches, it's been a long time, I really don't remember a lot, but we kind of linked arms and crossed the line. And then we were nicely, very politely arrested and handcuffed. And then we had to sit in vans and wait for, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes to be booked. And we were booked right there at the gate in, Vandenberg Space Force Base. And then it took about a year, and the Air Force, and a lot of paperwork, a lot of phone meetings and so on, but finally the Air Force said they withdrew the charges. They didn't want the publicity. I'm sure it was because Dan Ellsberg was part of it, and Cindy Sheehan. So they didn't want the publicity, so they just ended the case, withdrew the charges, and but we each, the 12 or 15 of us, each got a stack of papers like that, all redacted almost, like 90% redact, blacked out, and that was our goodbye gift, I guess. But and Dan was nice, he was friendly. He and Louis sat there comparing how many arrests each one, had, and
that's bad luck.
And I remember, I really knew nothing. This was my first and only arrest so far, but I knew nothing. So as we're going towards the line, I'm shouting, I didn't know if I had to make a plea right away or not, which you don't. But I said, do I have to say guilty to be able to leave tonight? And he finally heard me. Dan heard me up, he was up in front, and he heard me, and he said, no, don't worry about it, no. So that's what I remember. But it took a whole year it was a long drawn out thing, but no jail.
But
just
how many appearances did you have?
About 3. 3 trips to Santa Barbara.
All the way to Santa Barbara. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. Welcome to the Monterey Peace and Justice Center. If you haven't been here, we're a nonprofit and we're dedicated to peace, justice, nonviolence, democracy, and sustainable environmental sustainability. If you're not getting the Monterey Peace or the weekly peace calendar, it's a listing of events here at the Peace Center and all over the county. You can sign up for it. You'll find these on the front desk there, right inside the door. You can put it in a big jar. Just your email. That's all we need. Your name, put your name, and we'll send that to your email. You can also find it online at peacecentral.org. So, and now I'm going to turn it over to Sydney. She'll introduce the program.
Yeah, so we're going to see a compilation of 6 different speeches that Daniel Ellsberg made. 3 of them were at Livermore, and 3 of them were when he was older and stayed at home. Well, it was actually during COVID, that's why he stayed at home. But they were messages to Livermore. And so anyway, it's an hour and a half long that I think it's worth watching all the way through. And all you have to do is go to YouTube and put in Daniel Ellsberg, Dismantle the Doomsday Machine, Livermore Lab. And anyway, so I cut it down to from 90 minutes to 50 minutes. And so that we have plenty of time for Masako's presentation about the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which is an international treaty. And she has a sort of a PowerPoint thing that she's going to show us, which is going to be great. And then the last thing is that I'm going to introduce you to House Resolution 77 and urge you to get in touch with your congressperson. If it is Jimmy Panetta, you really need to get in touch with him. And but if it's Zoe Lofgren, you really need to thank her. And McGregor was talking to me this morning. She said that she'd been talking to Zoe Lofgren's office because she's a Saloons resident, and that Zoe was feeling she really needed to hear more, not just from her own constituents, but from people in surrounding, rest of California. And so anyway, that's our program. So without further ado, we're going to have a look at this Daniel Ellsberg, and there he is laying with his wife Patricia on the ground. I don't know if you had the same experience. Yeah, okay, we can start.
And those of the world from nuclear winter that would result from carrying out these threats. Least of all, obviously, the US and Russia, the other members of NATO that support first-use threats, and which we're now openly talking of extending, in effect, to Asia in various ways. China has had, creditably, a no first-use policy formally all this time, since it acquired nuclear weapons in '64, except that few people seem to be aware of this. They have always accepted Taiwan as applying to that because it's an internal matter. It's part of China, as they declare. But in this case, with their current conventional superiority, the reckless move of Pelosi, which nobody seems to have succeeded in dissuading her from doing, the playing with fire that is being done in our name here is totally irresponsible. For 70 years, it's the protest of American citizens and elsewhere in the world, many, many millions of people protesting periodically and declaiming the idea of using nuclear weapons that have kept the threats from being carried out so far. That match that Pelosi is lighting as I speak can be blown out. And well, essentially, it's up to us to do that. Thank you.
So he was 92. He was 92 when he died. And he and Patricia had been married for 53 years.
So he was pretty lucid almost to the end.
Yeah.
Very lucid. Didn't miss.
Yeah, there they are. That's Patricia holding
Great
on
time.
the. I don't know if that was in 22 or, but anyway. So there you have it. And yeah, it's not happy news, but I think we have to face up to what is. I want to introduce my friend Masako Toki, who is Senior Project Manager and Research Associate for the James Martin Center for Nonproliferation Studies in Middlebury Institute, in Monterey. And she is in charge of the Critical Issues Forum, a high school outreach program to promote disarmament education. And I know she is a fan of the International Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And she's going to give us a little slideshow. And so that we'll understand it better. Yes, please. Yes.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you so much for inviting me. And I know you are very, active, very passionate peace activist. So I think there are lots of things I can learn from you. But today I am very happy to have opportunity to talk a little bit about my project, and also, my passion and nuclear disarmament issues, especially with the emphasis on this treaty on the prohibition of. I'm going to talk about this international initiative for nuclear disarmament and this particular treaty. And my passion is really youth education. So just a little bit about myself. As you can imagine, I'm originally from Japan, and I grew up in Japan. And my first encounter to nuclear disarmament issue was when I was a high school student. From a school excursion, I had opportunity to visit Nagasaki, and I went with other students, went to the Nagasaki Peace Memorial Museum, and that was quite shocking. And that memory always stayed with me. And after I graduated from college and working a little bit in Japan to make sure that I can have some enough money to come to the US. And I came to the US over 20 years ago, and I went to the Middlebury Institute of International Studies to study international policy, and also really focused on nuclear disarmament issues. And it was quite a big decision for me. I had a quite not really well-paid job, but a stable job. But I quit, and I really wanted to dedicate my life for global peace, especially. I came to the US 20 years ago, so of course there are lots of other Japanese students, but unlike now, it was still a big decision for me, the Japanese women come to the US to study nuclear disarmament. So, but I never regret it. So now I'm going to talk about the treaty and some project, but I always, start with these photos. How many of you have been to Hiroshima, Nagasaki? Oh, great! Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, and but of course this Hiroshima atomic bomb dome and this Nagasaki peace statue. These are the origin of Japan's disarmament policy, but this really became the important place for global nuclear disarmament. But so today I said I'm going to talk about TPNW, Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. But in order for me to talk about this TPNW, which is a relatively new international treaty, I always need to also touch upon a little bit about this old treaty, Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty, NPT. How many of you are familiar with this treaty, NPT? Thank you. Yeah, so NPT came into force in 1970, and NPT is a very important international treaty. And without NPT, most likely there will have more and more nuclear weapon states. But there is some issue with NPT, because basically this treaty divided the world into two categories. One is nuclear weapon states, and then the other one is non-nuclear weapon states. So this treaty is inherently discriminatory treaty, although it is very important treaty. So basically, currently, world has two categories of country. 5 countries, US, Russia, UK, France, China, are the so-called nuclear weapon states. Those countries are legally, those countries are allowed to have nuclear weapons under this NPT. But none of other countries are allowed to have nuclear weapons under this treaty. But of course, as you know, there are some exceptions, because India, Pakistan, and Israel, because these 3 countries are not part of this international treaty. And then, of course, North Korea. North Korea was part of this treaty, but they withdrew in 2003. So now they have a nuclear weapons. So that's a little bit of a background, and so this deep division between nuclear weapon states and the non-nuclear weapon states continue to grow, because although, as we all know, the number of nuclear weapons decreased, at the height of the Cold War, there are more than 70,000 nuclear weapons, but currently approximately 12,000 nuclear weapons. So this means the number has changed. However, as you may know, the intention towards global zero is almost non-existent. So of course, countries who don't have a nuclear weapons got frustrated, and they really thought it's important to have a new treaty to compensate this treaty, because the NPT itself clearly said world needs to, all those countries who under the NPT should work toward a world free of nuclear weapons. But there are big questions, because there is no deadline or how to move forward the world free of nuclear weapons. So this is kind of like a homework without a deadline, without a due date. I work with high school students and college students, and if you don't have a deadline of a final paper, usually you don't submit, right? You wait until, you know, I don't know until when. But so the big question is it really possible to have a world free of nuclear weapons just with the NPT? But then one very important NPT review conference happened. Actually, NPT review conference happened every 5 years. And this 2010 NPT review conference is very important in many ways. First, it was very successful, and they agreed to this final document. And there is this very important paragraph. So that's why I'm gonna just read it quickly. The conference expresses its deep concern at the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of any use of nuclear weapons, and reaffirms the need for all states at all times to comply with applicable international law, including international humanitarian law. So this catastrophic humanitarian consequences, this literal sentence was included in the NPT final document. And as you know, all the 5 nuclear weapon states, US, Russia, China, UK, France, they are also a member of NPT, and technically they agreed to include this sentence. And of course, as someone from Japan who have had the opportunity to listen to atomic bombing survivors, hibakusha in my own language many times, since when I was a child, I had a quite a good understanding of how terrible the nuclear weapons were. And I was also, wow, this is great that the NPT finally included this sentence. But to me, oh, finally. So because it's kind of, you know, common sense to me that nuclear weapon causes catastrophic humanitarian consequences. But I think this was to some extent changed the momentum. So after the 2010 NPT review conference, more and more momentum to support, to discuss nuclear issues from more human aspects. Until then, mainly the nuclear issues were discussed by like a more like a military perspective, a political perspective. But if someone said, "Oh, nuclear weapon is terrible," you know, that when you look at what happened in Hiroshima, Nagasaki, that kind of discussion was not really professionally accepted. That's very bad in my perspective, because it is so important to discuss nuclear issues from a human aspect. What kind of a humanitarian impact the nuclear weapon would cause? So that's why I just want to warn you that many pictures are very disturbing, very sad, but these are the reality of the consequences of the use of nuclear weapons, and I'm pretty sure that you have seen these photos. When I talk to high school students, I also need to give us some heads up. You know, the photos you are going to see is very, shocking. But so it's so important to understand what happens under the mushroom cloud. So when you hear the nuclear weapons or Hiroshima and Nagasaki, perhaps the first image comes to your mind is a shape of mushroom cloud. But that's not the real nuclear weapons result. What really means is important thing is what happened under the mushroom cloud. And these photos most of these photos are from Hiroshima and the Nagasaki Atomic Museum. And for this audience, I'm pretty sure that you all know how many people died, but just to recap, in Hiroshima, August 6, 1945, more than 140,000 people died by the end of that year. And at that time, the population was 350,000. So this really tells you the impact of nuclear weapons. And only 3 days later, in Nagasaki, more than 74,000 people died. So the Hiroshima bomb was a uranium type bomb, and the Nagasaki bomb was a plutonium type bomb. So United States used these two different kinds of bombs against Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki each. So of course, as Daniel Ellsberg said, most of Japanese cities were bombed by conventional bombs, which is also very terrible. In the same year, in March 1945, due to the Great Tokyo Air Raid, more than 100,000 people died in one night. So that's a horrible thing. But many bombs were used. More than 100 bombs were used, closer to 1,000 bombs. But in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, only just one bomb killed so many people. So that really tells you the power of nuclear weapons, destructive powers. And these are some photos from a museum. And whenever I see these photos, I almost cry, because just use imagination. Most of the victims were children and elderly people and women. And just to give you some example, this tricycle. 3-year-old boy was playing with this tricycle. It's easy to imagine what happened to the boy. And also, these are the artifacts. And children's uniform and lunchbox. So many, you can see all these artifacts. It's really, really heartbreaking, but very eloquently tells you the victims of nuclear weapons in both cities. And these are, to me, the most heart-wrenching pictures. These were drawn by atomic bombing survivors many years later, just based on their memories. Because of course, when bomb was dropped, you cannot take photos. Nowadays, whatever happens, everybody takes photos and posts on the social media. And 8 years ago, even people cannot take photos. So But these are, I think, the most accurate picture description of what happened. And I also always ask students, like, please use your imagination. Just imagine how these atomic bombing survivors felt when they were drawing this picture. Just trying to remember what really happens. Most of atomic bombing survivors, they really do not want to remember because the most painful memories. But the only reason they do is they really want to make sure that no one else are going to suffer like they have done. So it's so noble causes. And I have fortunate to have some personal friends, atomic bomb survivors, and all of them, they really don't have any resentment against the United States. Of course, there was some stages, but those atomic bombing survivors, their only hope is to make sure that future generations are not gonna suffer like they have. So their sole purpose is to make sure that nuclear weapons will never be used again, and that nuclear weapons will be eliminated from this earth. And this is just a very recent photo. And last year, the G7 summit happened in Hiroshima. So all the G7 leaders came to Hiroshima. And current Prime Minister of Japan, Prime Minister Kishida, is originally from Hiroshima. So this is, his initiative. He really wanted to have a G7 summit in Hiroshima. So all the G7 leaders, including Biden, Macron, everybody went to Hiroshima and visited the Atomic Bomb Museum briefly. And of course, there are some criticism. It's not just lip service or demonstration. There are lots of different views. But one thing I wanted to emphasize is that they had opportunity to listen to the atomic bombing survivors directly. And these atomic bombing survivors, her name is Miss Keiko Gra. I also met her directly. And she's amazing. And just a side note, she received an honorary degree from University of Idaho earlier this month because of her peace activities. And I was so happy to learn. And what she said in the interview, I thought that this is so meaningful. She said, I described what I saw in Hiroshima at the age of 8. I asked the leaders to relive it through my eyes and heart. I told my story as it happened, hoping they would feel the pain and the frustration. So, of course, we will never know how they really felt, but this type of activity is so important. Continue to approach, regardless of your audience. Young people, dignitaries, president, they really need to listen to atomic bombing survivors directly because the average age of atomic bombing survivor is 85 years old. So soon there will be a world without atomic bombing survivors, unfortunately. So that's why it's so important to learn the actual impact of the use of nuclear weapons. Then, actually, I think I have 2 minutes, right? So I'm going to skip some. So one thing, so I'm going to talk about my project and the TPNW, but before I go there, I also wanted to really introduce this book. I'm sure that everybody knows John Hersey's Hiroshima, which is very famous, but you may have not heard this book, Nagasaki, Life After Nuclear War, and this author, Ms. Susan Thaddeus, happens to be my good friend. We met at the UN conference, and we are sitting next to each other throughout the conference, and she learned about my project, and I learned about her book, and I invited her to our high school conference to talk about her book. So this photo is from our conference at Middlebury, and what she said, again, it's so important. The stories of those who were beneath the mushroom clouds, can transform our generalized perceptions of nuclear war into visceral human experience. This is so important. Nuclear war planners or politicians or lots of people just see just a number. But when you talk about nuclear issues, I really believe it's so important to focus on each individual. Each individual is suffering. And that's also related to this treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, because this treaty is really focusing on the victims' side and also people's suffering. And this is one of my favorite quotes from one of late atomic bombing survivors, Mr. Katsuji Yoshida. He said, "The basis of peace is understanding the pain of others." This is simply said, but I really feel this is so important. This relates to everything in the world. If you really don't understand other people's suffering, you really cannot have a peaceful world. So, although this is very simple, I always remember these words when I talk about nuclear issues. And now, so this humanitarian initiative, after the 2010 NPT Review Conference, to discuss nuclear weapon issues from more human aspects, really gained a momentum, and in fact, this all really led to the negotiation of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And this initiative also engaged many different groups of civil society, like a doctors group or like a faith organization and educators, to really expanded a circle of debates related to nuclear issues, which is very important. Although we still need more people to think about nuclear issues, especially younger generation, but this is my role to talk about nuclear issues whenever I have opportunity to many people, including young people. And after this NPT Review Conference, there were 3 important international conferences to discuss humanitarian impact of the nuclear weapons. The first conference happened in Oslo, Norway in 2013, and this was this conference really avoided to discuss any politics. So they really focused on more scientific or human impact. So, but of course, none of nuclear weapon states came to this conference. And the second one happened in Mexico. The name of the city is Nayarit. And this Mexico humanitarian conference went a little bit further. The chairman of this conference really mentioned the importance of international law to prohibit nuclear weapons. Then again, none of nuclear weapon states came. And the third one, this happened in Vienna, Austria, 2014, December 2014. And at this conference, very important document was adopted. First, it was titled Austrian Pledge, because the conference happened in Vienna, Austria. But later, this pledge changed the name, and it is called now Humanitarian Pledge. One of the most important things of this pledge is to stigmatize nuclear weapons. So this means not just prevent the use of nuclear weapons, but the very existence of nuclear weapons itself is denied. The nuclear weapon should never exist. That's a strong message, because we all hear, there are many people who justify the existence of nuclear weapons because it's important to have a stability. Nuclear deterrence is important. That's many people say. But this treaty, this pledge really said that we have to stigmatize this nuclear weapons, and we need to work on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. Then the actual conference happened in March and June and July 2017. By the way, the president of the conference, Ambassador Ellen White Gomez, ambassador from Costa Rica. She also graduated from Middlebury Institute a long time ago, so I'm always very proud of her. Yeah, and this is just visualization. It's obvious which country opposed the treaty, which country supported. Of course, obviously, all the nuclear weapon states, both inside and outside of the NPT, and NATO countries and the US allies. And countries who supported this treaty is Austria, South Africa, Mexico, New Zealand, all those countries. So there are, of course, more countries supported, but these countries are core group. They're like core. Then the treaty was adopted July 7th, 2017, and I was fortunate to be able to this place. And I still remember lots of atomic bombing survivors were there, and I also cried because it was an amazing moment. Yeah. Of course, there are still lots of challenges. So I mentioned NPT at the beginning, that the treaty divided the world into two categories. But under this treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, TPNW, is completely prohibit nuclear weapons. And one very important statement done by this atomic bombing survivor, Ms. Setsuko Faro. She's a survivor from Hiroshima. And she was also at the conference, and in her closing statement, I'm not going to read everything, but she said, this is the beginning of the end of nuclear weapons. I think this is a very accurate statement, because this treaty itself is not going to dismantle single nuclear weapons. This treaty, as the title said, Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. So basically, this treaty prohibits nuclear weapons, but details comes later, and the devils live in the details. So there are lots of things that we have to do to have an actual dismantlement, and how to engage nuclear weapon states. Currently, none of the nuclear weapons, none of U.S. allies are part of this treaty. And this is a voting result at the conference. 122 countries voted for, and only one country voted against, which is Netherlands, part of a NATO member, and Singapore abstained. And nuclear weapon states didn't even participate. And only US ally participated in the conference is Netherlands, because Netherlands has I also wonder why Netherlands participated, because Netherlands has a very effective civil society structure, and the Netherlands civil society put pressure to their parliament to ask the politician to participate in the treaty negotiation. That's the reason why Netherlands participated in this conference. So this is just an overview of the negotiation. So currently, so let's see, how many countries are part of this treaty? So 93 countries signed, and 70 countries completed the process, ratified. Basically, they became the member. So you may think it's only 70 or already 70. It's kind of a glass half full or half empty type of a debate. But as you see, most of the countries are global south, And yeah, but I also wanted to mention that all these countries in the world, depending on how you count, but around 200 countries. So these green areas are the countries who are generally supporting or completely supporting or ready to support the treaties. So of course, most of the African countries or Caribbean countries or Latin American countries or South Pacific, they are supporting. They just don't have a capacity to have a legislative process. So they are, generally supporting, but there are so many other things to do, because the civil war is happening, or for them, nuclear weapons, perhaps small weapons or landmines are the most important things. But generally, more than, I would say 70% of 60 to 70% of the world population are quite supportive of this treaty. And these areas, like red countries, nuclear weapon states, and the US allies, they are clearly opposed this treaty. And the yellow countries, like for example, Sweden, Switzerland, they are still, have not decided. But I think this also can tell you the world is really hoping to have especially general public, ordinary citizens are really hoping to have a world free of nuclear weapons. And so let's just quickly take a look at what's in there. So as I said, that very important purpose of this treaty is to create a norm against nuclear weapons. So this treaty has quite a details, but it really didn't tell about like how to dismantle or too much detail. Because if they decided to negotiate such things, this treaty will never happen. It would have never happened. So this is those countries who wanted to have treaties. Those countries, diplomatic skill. First, they wanted to have this important treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons. So this treaty's important goal is to stigmatize and create norm against nuclear weapons. But this treaty prohibits every aspect of nuclear weapons, including making, developing, testing, producing, and also even just threat of use. Everything is prohibited. Yeah. So, but this is now entered into force, and this is an international treaty. Although none of the nuclear weapon states have joined, but this is a now legally binding treaty. And again, Ms. Cisco Farrow, the atomic bomb survivor, said, nuclear weapons have always been immoral. Now they are also illegal. I think this is a very powerful statement. So I'm not going to go into the details, but I also mentioned the NPT. A lot of people think, not a lot, some people, one of the strong argument against TPNW is TPNW is undermining the existing international treaty, such as NPT or the Nuclear Weapon Free Zone Treaty or Nuclear Weapon Test Ban Treaty, but that's not true, because in the preamble of this treaty, it's a very long preamble, it clearly said this treaty respect the existing treaty, like NPT or CTBT. So, and also this treaty, another unique aspect of this treaty is this treaty emphasizes the importance of disarmament and peace education. And also, other important aspect is this treaty emphasizes the importance of supporting victims. So victim assistance is also important article of this treaty. So, how to join the treaty? This is just one example what is said in the treaty. So, for example, although it's not going to happen in the immediate future, but say one of the nuclear weapon states want to decide to join. So, do they need to dismantle their nuclear weapon, or they can join? There are two different ways. So, basically, this treaty is open to everybody, including the nuclear weapon states and the non-nuclear weapon states. And if you have a nuclear weapon, don't worry, you can still join. So it's really up to you. That's what it said. If you think you can dismantle nuclear weapons before you join, that's one way to do that. Other way is to, why don't you join first, then disarm later. So of course there are lots of details, but this is also an important aspect. So basically, this treaty is not excluding the nuclear weapon states. So again, the main criticism against this treaty is, TPNW is undermined. But as I said, it's not the case. And the NPT is a very, simple treaty, and it's not the, self-implementing treaties. So we need to have more details to really make a progress towards a nuclear disarmament. So TPNW is compensating NPT. That's my opinion. Of course, I am also fully aware that everybody has a different opinion. And so then this treaty is also a very good example, successful example, the collaboration between like-minded government, like for example, New Zealand, Austria, and civil society, especially the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons that received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017 because of their work for TPNW, and also atomic bombing survivor. So UN Secretary General also praised the work of civil society. And speaking of civil society, we are all civil society, so I'm a strong believer of the power of civil society. And the civil society included lots of organizations, including Buddhist organization or Vatican and interfaith community. And the Pope Francis also is also a very strong supporter of TPNW. Yeah. So then this is something you may already know, that the role of the local government is also important. So I know Monterey is city of Monterey is part of Mayors for Peace. And I still remember the last year at the Hiroshima Day, Sand City, the mayor came, and Sand City just joined the Mayors for Peace. Yeah. So, and again, the importance of youth. And speaking of young people, the United Nations, Antonio Guterres is a very strong supporter of youth education, and young people are the ultimate force for change. And our center, he's our center's director, he's also really supporting the youth education. And he was advisor to the late Kofi Annan for the disarmament matter. And so that's why our center is very active in educating younger generation. And then just quickly, I also, if you have not, basically what I'm going to talk is about this, so please take one copy. So every year we have a spring conference, and we just finished the spring conference in April. So we are having a nuclear disarmament education, engaging the Americans and the Japanese high school students. So, and we are start with the teachers workshop and the students conference. So these are some photos from a recent conference, and of course during the COVID we did everything online, and most of the events are open to the public, and I'm happy to invite you guys, and if you're interested in. And these are some photos from previous conference, but I wanted to show this. This was a little bit before that. In 2016, former Defense Secretary William Perry came to our conference. After he retired, he became a very strong advocate of nuclear disarmament, especially young people. So his speech was so powerful. And at that time, I think he was closer to 90 years old, but so sharp and so articulate. And he just didn't give a keynote speech. He stayed and watched the students' presentation. Yeah, so we also had a conference in Nagasaki in 2017 and a conference in Hiroshima in 2015. So usually we have a conference in Monterey, but in the future I'm also thinking to have a conference in Nagasaki or Hiroshima. So you can find all the information about our project So please take a look at it. And if you have any question, please feel free to reach out to me. So I'm gonna stop here, but thank you so much for your attention.
I have a thing here that these are the signatories to the TPNW, and there are currently 98. Some of them have ratified, most of them have ratified, 69 have ratified, and 29 have signed.
Actually, 93 signed and 70 ratified.
Oh, good, okay. And it's so fun to see the new ones coming on board. The most recent are the Bahamas, Sao Tome and Principe. And, you know, I didn't even know the name of Sao Tome and Principe. And so you look them up on a map, you know, you have to find out who these nations are, but more are being added. And one thing, actually 2 nuclear weapons armed states did give up their nuclear weapons. They were South Africa, this was early on, South Africa and Kazakhstan. They relinquished, they said, we think it's a great idea, we're gonna join the TPNW. I have made copies of it, and please take them because I hate them to go to waste. This is the basic essential parts of the TPNW. It's just a very brief synopsis. It's really easy to read. And then you know, she mentioned all the different NGOs. There are so many, you know, there are like 800 different NGOs that attend these conferences every year. And so the most recent one was in December of 23. And there were, I think, 800 plus different NGOs and organizations that came, and they're from over 100 different countries, and they lend their support in that way. Like Masako said, you know, some of them are groups of doctors, and some of them are other groups from, you know, different clergy all over the world, and Pope Francis. I mean, it's the movement is growing, and it is international law now, because after 50 states ratified it in 2021, it became international law. And so the thing to do it is to keep talking it up and stigmatize the nations that aren't willing to sign. Because it's a good idea, even just to aspire to a world without nuclear weapons. So, and then just one last thing. Only 2 of the nuclear armed nations have had parliamentarians who have stepped away from the governments that they are in. And the first was in the UK. And so there were a couple of members of parliament who said, my government isn't ready to sign, but I am. And then in our own country, 44 of our House members, the U.S. House of Representatives, there are tiny pictures of them. But you can look at them through a magnifying glass, and I guarantee you'll be able to read their names. And 7 of whom are from the state of California have signed on to HR 77. And here is a synopsis of what that is. Please take one of these. It's not hard to read. And then your homework is, like I said before, if you live in Jimmy Panetta's district, you have to call his office and in the politest possible way say, what's wrong with you? What the heck? You know, you proclaim yourself as a peace candidate, and he certainly does that when he comes to see us. And yet, you're not signed on. And Zoe Lofgren, who is the representative for Salinas and South County and part of, you know, how redistricting is very strange. Anyway, she has signed. She's one of the 44.
So we
And
call
so
her and say thank you?
Yeah, absolutely, so call her, because like I said earlier, McGregor, when I talked to her today, she said, please, Zoe's office people say she needs to hear from you, how grateful you are, even though you're not her constituent. I mean, you know,
Doesn't matter.
it doesn't matter. And so, and if you want to call the other ones, they're all here. And please take one. I didn't waste our paper just, you know, to not have it get picked up. So that's all I wanted to say. This is all, this one is on the treaty, the TPNW. And these are all about House Resolution 77. And that's our program. That's an honorship, folks. And you can go online and learn a lot about the history of I mean, it's a fascinating history. And I mean, one of the most interesting things, I think, is that very early on, very early on, when the idea was just sort of out there, I think it was 2014, at one of these conferences, actually, oh no, it was 2010, I guess, 2010, that North Korea, actually, which is a nuclear armed state, said, yeah, okay, we think it's a good idea. And it's the only, other than South Korea and Kazakhstan. Of course, they changed their mind when they saw that none of the other nuclear armed states were willing to touch it with a 10-foot pole. I mean, because, face it, little boys do not like to relinquish their most powerful toys under any circumstance. No, you're not going to have my toy. No, those are mine. I'm not going to. Yeah, so anyway, that's it. Now I'll shut up. Thank you so much for coming in.
You're saying that Japan voted no, correct?
Right.
And yet, I remember when I was young, you know, I think there was a nuclear aircraft carrier or something, just around 1960, 59 or something, and we weren't going to allow it to land. But here's a country, I mean, and now they're talking about rearming Japan and such. And what's the, you know, you're talking about civil society and such. So what's the going on there regarding this?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Just briefly, Japanese government has a very complicated, you know, thinking. But generally, civil society, Japanese people, most of them, more than half, I would say 70%, I don't know the exact number, but more than half of the Japanese population is supportive of the TPNW. However, as you know, Japan is an ally of the United States, and Japan is protected by the extended nuclear deterrence, nuclear umbrella. So Japanese government cannot support this treaty, because if Japan supports TPNW, okay, so United States may say, oh, you think nuclear weapons is illegal, so why do you need help from nuclear weapons? Yeah. So Japanese government has a very, very complicated feeling, the dilemma. This is a huge dilemma for Japanese government as the only country that has experienced nuclear devastation, but protected under the nuclear umbrella. So this is an ongoing dilemma. But that's why I really believe it's so important to talk about nuclear issues from a human aspect and changing the, you know, like the discourse. So, but unfortunately, I don't think there is a short-term solution. I really don't think Japan is going to support Japanese government will be in a position to support TPNW in the immediate future. That's the current situation. Yeah, very good point. Thank you.